Hello and welcome to yesterday's airlines. In this video, I'm going to be taking a quick look comparing the jcwings Gemini 747-8 to the ngmodels 747-8 mold samples. I'll also talk a bit about the Phoenix 747-8 as well, although I admit I do not own any examples of that mold, but I can use some photos from our friendly internet to illustrate some of the points raised there. It's nice that there are now going to be three molds which all share good features for the type. I don't think any of them are bad molds, but I think it's reasonably clear that there is a ranking of the molds, especially for the 8i version here. And so it's worthwhile taking a look and making a comparison, I think. So that's what we'll do in this video. Obviously, before I get to that, got to tell you guys to subscribe to the channel and check me out at Instagram and Facebook at YesToAirlines. And obviously check out the detailed reviews of these ngmodels 747-8 samples at yesterdaysairlines.com if you've not done so already. There's always new content coming from a variety of sources, sometimes gifts like these from the manufacturer, sometimes models that I bought, sometimes reviews of the history of the scale, sometimes a look at the history of the aircraft in service. Lots of different material, and I publish quite a lot, so keep an eye out for that. But for now, let's take a bit of a closer look at the 747-8 in 400 scale. So this model is a jcwings release that comes directly from my collection. We're in the Sunrise version of the Boeing house colors, and it's a super nice model. And I have to say, overall, I like the jcwings 747-8 quite a lot. And in many ways, it shares a lot of features that the new ngmodels samples also have. So that is, I think, a credit to both the molds. When you get two molds that they look quite similar, it usually means that they look quite similar to the real thing. And I think in this case, that is the case as well. But let's get a little bit closer in with this jcwings version and see what I think of her. So I'm just going to turn off the turntable and let's get her a bit closer up to the camera. Okay. So here we go. See, it's got a nice pearlescent livery on this one, but we're not here to talk about the livery. We're here to talk about the model. So let's just move her around. Okay, so first off, I think it's generally quite a good nose section here, but I would have to say that perhaps the shape, the transition from the cockpit down to the nose cone is a little bit soft, and the nose a little bit longer than would be ideal. So it's a good nose, but not necessarily a perfect nose. And maybe if I can get the NG version in frame here and have a look, I think you'll see that the NG version's nose just looks a little bit sharper. When it comes to the Phoenix nose, I think that's a decent nose as well. I think they've all got okay noses, but and certainly substantially better than the Phoenix 747-400, say. But I do think that maybe the NG does have the best nose of the three. When it comes to nose gear, the nose gear on the JZ mold is actually quite short, and it doesn't necessarily hold the aircraft nose high like the Phoenix version does, which is a bit longer. In fact, sometimes it almost looks like it's a little bit nose down when you've got the aircraft down on the ground. Now, I have to say that the NG version as well does not have an incredibly tall nose gear, and if you put these both close to each other down here, then you can see that broadly they're at the same level. So the nose gear is quite short on both of them. Could it be longer? Maybe it could be slightly longer, but I'm not sure it needs to be necessarily quite as long as on the Phoenix. So from the nose, I say that they're all doing quite well, but personally, and obviously you can call me biased, I think that the NG version probably has a slightly nicer nose section than the jcwings one, but this is no slouch, certainly. When we move to the middle of the aircraft, and this is a really strong area for the JC version, It's got this really excellent squared off wing join here and a really nice fairing area here, which it matches almost exactly what is on the NG version. Also, when you flip it over, we've got the inlets, which are sculpted in, which look really good here. And that is substantially better than on the Phoenix 747-8, which has a really ugly round wing joint, which doesn't really bear any resemblance to the actual aircraft. Looking at the engines, again, I think the engines from the side on the JC mold look really good, and the engine panels too are very nice as well. No real problems there, and they match, again, broadly with what is on the NG version. Perhaps this pylon underside here is a little bit too rounded in comparison to the real thing, but broadly it looks very nice. This model has solid core engines. I'm not entirely sure if the newest ones do. I haven't bought one for a little while. These are solid core, so obviously they don't look quite as good as the engine fans on the new NG version, which I can probably just bring into shot here, which do look a little bit nicer because they're not quite, even though I don't think you can quite see through the engine, they do move and their fans are individually sculpted. But obviously, the other thing you can see is that the fan blades are oriented correctly on the JC, not currently on the NG sample. I'm sure that will be changed. Moving over, one thing that this mold does have that the NG doesn't is the pivoting main gear. So that is a nice feature. Like I say, on my previous video, it's not really something that excites me too much because the models are usually static, but it is something that is here and looks quite good. And broadly, I think the undercarriage is excellent on this mold. Moving to the rear, and it's got a very nice APU on this JC mold, really nicely sculpted in with some fine detail there. It's also got an excellent rudder assembly area here and this nice free rudder portion. Looks really good, some nice detailing. Overall, it's a nice tail, but this area here is too curvy. And if I compare that to the tail on the NG version, if I can get them both in shot, you can see the difference. And it is definitely the NG version which is better in that space. So if I'm looking at the tails, I think that the JC tail is not as good as the NG version. If I look at the Phoenix tail, I'll talk about that, then it's clear that the tail on the Phoenix is a bit of a mess, mainly because Phoenix have got one of these old-fashioned molds where the join is substantially longer, or substantially shorter, should I say, than it should be, and you get this large area underneath, which is not touching the fuselage, much wider than it would be if it were just the rudder, so it doesn't look particularly good. Overall, for the 8i, I think that the JC mold here is a mold I really like, but I would say that the nose portion is not quite as good as the NG. I'd say that obviously the NG's got more up-to-date engine fans, and I would say that the tail form here is better. But on the plus side for this one, it's got the pivoting main gear, and it's perhaps got a nicer APU than the NG version. So this still comes out as a nice mold. I don't think it's quite as nice as the NG version here, but it is still an excellent mold. Now, if I'm comparing the Phoenix version, which as I say, I don't own, then I think the Phoenix is coming in quite a distant third. It's not bad by any shot, but the wing join area is nowhere near as nice as on either of these molds. And overall in detail, I just don't think it really fits as nicely. Certainly the tail join is nowhere near as realistic. So those two are the biggest areas that I have of issue with the Phoenix version. So that's my view in terms of the 747-8i. I think the NG is just pipping. The JC version, I think it's substantially better than the Phoenix, but so is the JC too. Let's have a quick look at the freighters as well. Okay, so once again, I do not own any Phoenix 747-8 freighters, but I do have a couple of the jcwings Gemini efforts, a pair which are like this one, this Cathay one here, fully static models, and also a single interactive version. Now, interactive you have to kind of take to the side here. NGM offering an interactive version. If that's a feature you really want, then you have to buy the jcwings Gemini mold. And to be honest, I really like that feature, so it is reasonably tempting. But if you're not too worried about that, then you can make a more direct comparison, which is what we'll have a look at here. As I say, I don't own the Phoenix ones. They're going to have the same issues that the passenger version had, but as I understand it, the Phoenix 747-8 freighter has a correct and accurate hump shape, whereas it is the hump shape which has been the area of most concern for people with the jcwings 747-8 freighter. So we'll just take a quick closer look at that now. Okay, so here we've got the 747-8 freighter from jcwings Gemini, and I do quite like the form of this, though I don't think the nose, as I said before, is necessarily as accurate as the NG version. It still looks pretty decent, but the big issue that people have with this mold is not the nose, it is this hump region here, which just is not long enough and finishes rather abruptly here when it should perhaps move along closer to the sea. And you can see that if you compare this to the NG version, if I can get them both in shot, that the NG version just has a longer, nicer hump form that joins with the fuselage roof line less abruptly and is more accurate. So that's a definitive improvement on the NG version. Moving to the middle of the plane, it looks very similar to the 8i, and therefore it is very nice. It's got this really good wing join region. It's got nice detailing underneath here with the inlets. It's got good pylons in general and nice engines. They've got the solid core fans. I'm not entirely sure if JC have updated these since I bought this model. They may have. And it's got a decent wing shape as well, though I do think that the wings lack rather the changed angle, which should be happening roughly around here. It's hard to see sometimes, but they look pretty much like they just go straight almost to me. Moving towards the rear of the aircraft, and it's got a good rear here with a particularly nice APU, just like I pointed out beforehand. I get it to focus. There we go, nice detailing on the APU, and a nice rudder join here as well with the free rudder, not too long. But it does also have that rather unusual tail shape that the JC mold is known for. Again, if I compare that to the NG version, move them both in the camera at once, you can see that on the NG there's a lot less. The curve is more abrupt, it's a lot better form that looks more accurate. So that is an improvement again on the NG version. If we're comparing to the Phoenix model, which I don't own, then I think it's reasonably obvious that the Phoenix tail join is still not very good, and neither is the fuselage join. But overall, otherwise, I think that their Phoenix 747-8 has a decent hump, doesn't have the issues that the JC effort does have. So it's a little bit different with the freighter version as opposed to the passenger version, but you've got to say that overall they are still a decent mold. It never bothered me as much as it has the shape of the hump, I admit, but I know it does upset people quite a bit, so I don't want to diminish that as an issue. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you compare these from a freighter version, then I think the NG does have a slightly better nose. It's certainly got a better hump. It's got some better detailing inside the engines. But you've got to say the JC still has the pivoting main gear. It's got a nicer APU. So swings and roundabouts to a degree, but I think that the NG still pips this one, and probably pips it by more than it does against the 8i version because of that hump form. Obviously, if the NG is beating the JC wings, then you'd expect it to be beating the Phoenix too, because the Phoenix mold does have that clumsy join at the wing and also has an incredibly clumsy vertical stabilizer fit. So, yeah, in my opinion, the NG freighter is beating both the JC and the Phoenix too. So overall, I would say that in my opinion, having looked at the mold samples, having looked at these models from my collection, that the NG7478 is better than the jcwings version to a degree. Obviously, in some places, it is not as good in terms of the APU at the present time and the pivoting main gear, but in perhaps more important areas, such as the shape of the hump on the freighter, such as the general form of the nose, such as the fan blade detailing, and that form of the tail join to the fuselage at the front of the tail, leading edge there. I think the NG version is beating this mold. It's clear already by the fact that I don't own any that I think that the Phoenix version of the 7478 is inferior and not as good as the JC version, but you know, it's rarely the case that Phoenix are beating JC on a reasonably new mold, I have to say anyway. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what NG do with their 7478 molds in the future. I do think that there's obviously a market, especially amongst younger collectors. I mean, clearly I would rather have 747 Classics, but at the same time, it's good to see good molds, and I'm never upset by looking at interesting, good, high quality new mold samples. So thank you very much, NG, for sending me those samples. It's given me the opportunity to do this little comparison with the jcwings Gemini mold, which is still a fine mold and not necessarily one I'll be racing out to replace in my collection. But I do think that the NG pipped both the JC and the Phoenix overall. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Check out more content at Yesterday's Airlines, and I'll see you next time.